is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Schools and madrasas, are they preparing our children for tomorrow's world? Or are we falling into the trap that Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu warned us about, which was, do not prepare your children for a time that was yours and is not theirs. In other words, are they preparing them for yesterday's world? We shall see, inshallah. Let's have a conversation about this. The views of our external speakers are solely theirs. They do not represent the views of Knowledge to Action. Mashallah, these guys are veterans in this field, as I said. I'm your host, Waqaus Ali. Welcome to webinar 6 again in a 7-part series. That means tomorrow's session is the final one. And we are flowing very nicely from that first webinar only 2 weeks ago, where we started on looking at the role of parents and educators in nurturing world changes in a changing world. And every theme that we've had has built on a problem and then a solution. And we've looked at different themes, which I'll touch upon very quickly. Today's theme is really about where we send our children for ta'aleem or tarbiyah. Which one, what's the difference between the two? We'll get on to that, inshallah. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Islamic Relief, Alhamdulillah. Ilm to Amal, for those of you who are seeing it for the first time, there's a website, there's 2 hour resources to our website, and there's also social media handles. You can look up our work, what we do, but in a nutshell, we try to specialize in character development and life skills education for children, for educators, and for parents. And this is some of the work that we do, you can see on the screen. For those of you who missed the last webinar, inshallah, there will be a recording with in the middle of editing all 5 webinars and the last 2. And we're building lots of bite-sized resources around them, both in video format and also in PDFs. So everything that we've covered and you've missed, if you're registered, inshallah, you should have access to a digital library very soon. But those of you who attended that, here's a recap of what we spoke about with our fantastic speaker and great Ustad, Idris Khamisa. We spoke about parental leadership and different leadership styles and looked at the pros and cons of each style and which one works for different scenarios and different children's needs. Now, as I mentioned, it's a 7-part series, Alhamdulillah. We started off, what was it, on the 1st of Ramadan, for many of us, rethinking about education for a changing world, and we focused on the what and how. And then we looked at these different modules. Alhamdulillah, we've gone through 5 of them. We've gone through 4 modules. And we're on today's module, which is about schools, intellectual developments. So we've looked at spiritual moral development. We've looked at mental health. We looked at emotional intelligence. We also looked at parental leadership. Now we're looking at the intellectual development as part of this conversation and discourse around what are we preparing our children for and how are we doing that. And so looking at intellectual development today, and tomorrow, inshallah, we'll be looking at the social and cultural development. In other words, we'll be looking at extracurricular clubs that our children will need. And this session feeds nicely into that because there will be some gaps in our institutes which need to be covered outside in extracurricular activities if we are to equip our children for a world that is changing quite radically. Today's format is an interactive conversation in 3 parts. We're going to look at part 1, which is a snapshot of the schools in Madrasahs in Britain. Why do these institutes exist? And why do parents send their children to them? I'm talking about schools, Muslim faith schools in particular, and because that's the vast majority of people who are here. And then madrasas, for those of you who are in the south, you might refer to them as maktab. And so, you know, these are the evening and after school club schools and supplementary schools, or on the weekends. And usually they are attached to a masjid, not always. Part 2, inshallah, I want to have a critical conversation. The title, talking about the future, could easily have said, well, we're talking about future proof, but are they actually fit for purpose today? And that conversation is really important, and it could offend a lot of people too. But it's a conversation that needs to be had. I am posing a question to our guest speakers: is the education that our children receive in the schools and the madrasas relevant to the needs of children today and tomorrow? And the last part, inshallah, I think is really important. As you know, with these Ilm Tumal webinars, the ethos of the organization is to move towards practice and start practical strategies and bring them into, move from the theory into practice and implementation. So inshallah, we should have some advice for parents and educators about the changes that are needed in Muslim institutes. And I guess the most important question is, who is actually going to be driving those changes that that our children need? And that's a conversation to have too. You know the ground rules, folks. Many of you have used webinars. We've been here before. One person speaks at a time. Please post the comments and questions in the comments in the chat forum and questions in the Q&A. There is a difference. If you put the questions in chat, we might miss them, and it might be like 5 hours by the time we get round to it, and the webinar's over. So please put them in the Q&A section. The comments, we really want to hear your comments, please. Try to keep your questions concise and relevant to the topic, inshallah ta'ala. And what's my last slide? Raise your hand if you want to speak. Please, we'd love to hear from you too. Without further ado, alhamdulillah, it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who I have a lot of respect for, mashallah, tabarakallah. And she's well known in the Islamic education world, not just here in the UK. And she's a very important figure for I think, driving the change in Islamic education. And it just gives me great pleasure to be able to share a platform with her on a number of occasions. We were there on yesterday, mashallah, we were together at the conference that she was organizing. Dr. Farah Ahmed, who is a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow at the Faculty of Education in Cambridge University. You can see from her CV, I'm not going to read it all out, but she is someone who's very well positioned with the work, with the research, and the graft that she's put in over the years as a working mum, mashallah. And not only is she running 2 successful schools in London in the form of Islam Shakhsiyah Foundation, she's also contributing to the body of knowledge when it comes to Islamic education and reform around curricula and teaching styles, and her work around dialogical learning and the Halakha program that she, mashallah, that's her brainchild, trying to encourage holistic Islamic education, but through dialogic learning. Now, dialogic learning for many of you will be like, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, it's maybe a technical term, but through conversational learning, and it's a lot more than that. You know, it's amazing that we have someone like Dr. Farah, mashallah, in our community, you know, and I can't do justice to her introduction because we are so grateful for the contribution what she brings to the table and the contributions, mashallah, she makes. So that's Dr. Farah Ahmed. You still there with us, Dr. Farah?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for the introduction.
How is your Ramadan going?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. The barakah Ramadan is always there.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, fantastic. Okay, Faizal, have you joined us? I just want to check if Faizal is with us. Faizal, give me a shout out.
I have joined you. Assalamu alaikum.
Brilliant, brilliant.
I need the camera on though. I think you've.
I'm going to make you a host. Just bear with me, Faizal.
I'm getting a little bit jealous.
I'm trying to find you and locate you, and I can't locate you at the moment. Just bear with me. Zahra, yes, you're on. So you should be. I'm going to make you a co-host, and now you should be able to help yourself.
There you go.
Assalamu alaikum, Faizal. Assalamu alaikum. And so this brings me to my second guest speaker, alhamdulillah. And again, he's not a stranger to the Islamic education sector. He's a colleague of myself and Dr. Farah, mashallah, and a good brother of ours. Faizal, mashallah, is the CEO of Nida Trust. Those of you who through COVID were logging on and would have seen webinar series, mashallah, being hosted by Nida Trust will be familiar with the work Faizal, mashallah, does. It's an educational charity that aims to raise awareness and the achievement of young people by working closely with the parents, the teachers, and the community. He's also, mashallah, the founding member of the City Academy Hackney and a founder of Rise Academy. Now, Rise Academy, mashallah, is a very progressive weekend Islamic school. I haven't had a chance to visit this despite the invitations, Faizal, you've given me over the years. Inshallah, after Ramadan, I must come down to Hackney. It's Hackney, right? It's based in
yes.
Hackney. Come and see the work there. But from what I've seen and heard from people on the ground, mashallah, it is a very progressive madrasa, a weekend school in London, mashallah, and he's doing some wonderful work. Now, Faizal's daytime job, he does operate as a vice principal of one of the City of London academies in London. Now, that's a mainstream school, okay? Faizal used to be part of the Muslim faith school movement. In other words, he was a head teacher of a faith school. So what Faizal is bringing to the table is two perspectives, I guess, where he's moved from the Muslim sector to the mainstream sector. And I just think that's so valuable to get his take and experience on the conversation today around schools and madrasas, but in particular faith schools and madrasas, and how they play an important role in shaping the future generation, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so let's start off, folks. If you've got some questions that you want to throw to us, the Q&A bank is open, the chat is open. I'm just going to check very quickly before we move in. Zahra, thank you very much. Zahra, mashallah, is a wonderful admin. She's not just the admin, she's also the famous author of the Ilm to Amal curricula and also the storybooks of Adam and Anisa. So I just want to make sure that the sound is okay, because I feel there is a message saying it's a bit crackly. Sarah, can you hear me now? Is that okay? And so, yes, let's hear from you. There's going to be, inshallah, a lot of interaction, and we may not finish on time, as always with these webinars, because it's so, by the time we get to the end of our time slot, we've just got warmed up. Part one, why do Muslim faith schools and madrasas exist? Okay, so some of you saying for learning the deen, others are saying for preserving identity. Dr. Farah, shall we start with yourself first, inshallah ta'ala? Why do Muslim faith schools and madrasas exist?
It's again a complex question. I believe you've got a very comprehensive slide, which might be helpful.
Shall I go to that one there? There we go.
I think that might be useful.
Yeah.
And I think that you know, there is a shift over time regarding this, but I would say all of these reasons have existed at all times in different kind of capacities. So you've got their safeguarding Iman. And that was initially when Muslims came to this country. There was a little bit of a, we tend to carry a bit of a split personality around with us quite a lot. I mean, and I've sort of talked about that in terms of double consciousness and how it can be harnessed. But we had two approaches to education in this country. On the one hand, it was the famous British education system. And so we wanted our children to benefit from that. And that we felt that would give them progress. But on the other hand, we were conscious that the Iman of our children, their deen, their culture, their heritage would not get lost. So safeguarding Iman is a core reason for the establishment of initially madrasas, Quran classes, then into madrasas, and then eventually into full-time Muslim faith schools. And Islamic identity is clearly bound up with that. And what we mean by identity this term is something that I would like us to reflect on a little bit more, because the reason we use the term shakhsiyah in our schools is because shakhsiyah goes far beyond identity. Identity is a sort of political term, which maybe as Muslims we need to kind of broaden out. Academic attainment is important to our community to establish itself. I also have questions around what we mean by that. What are we valuing in terms of what is it to be an academic? What is it to learn? What is knowledge? What is ta'lim? Which I think we, at the moment, sadly, we have our reductionist attitudes that this is to do with grades, so it's to do with ABCs or 7, 8, 9s and that kind of thing. And then obviously future change makers is that which parent or which community doesn't want to see a progress in the future? That is always been an issue that we have. It's always an aim. Perhaps now we're beginning to think about it a little bit more, but I would say that there's the aims that you've got there would cover pretty much everything. There may be other things that other people, but I would say that for the purposes of time, that let's stick to these four as comprehensive. Yeah.
There's lots of other things that we could add here, but this was, I guess, a sort of a snapshot, if you want, of well, if you could tell the story of Muslim faith schools in this country, in one slide, what would it look like? And that's what this is really about, that we are on a journey, we are evolving. I've spoken to people who were there in the 70s and the 80s. Ustad Akram Khan Chima, I don't know if he's with us today, but he's someone that we hold very dear as our Ustad, all three of us. And he's very well known as a senior educationalist in this country. Now, he was there at that time. I think, if I'm not wrong, with Yusuf Islam, those who know him as possibly Cat Stevens, where they set up the first Islamic school in Islamia in West London. Now, when you listen to our elders, the focus initially was really around, it shouldn't come as a surprise. We've got a lot of Muslim girls' schools, and a lot of the early schools were Muslim girls' schools. So what does that tell you about the pioneers at that time and what they were thinking for the gender or the genders, around what education should look like for the girls and what education should look like for the boys? And I'm not entirely sure when the boys' schools came. It'll be really interesting to just get, another webinar just on the history of the Muslim schools in detail and how the origin started. But if you look at madrasahs, you're absolutely right what you said there about Dr. Farah. In madrasahs, they kind of have a similar sort of setup. And I guess madrasahs didn't start in 1950s. We're talking about the UK here. Madrasahs have come long from the East, from India, from the Indian subcontinent, from Persia, going back even further into the Arab world. So back in history, they're a lot longer than 1950s is the point. But the point we're trying to say here is they started off as Quran schools, and then you can see the curriculum or the purpose evolving over 50 years and 60 years, where Islamic studies was starting to be introduced. And then Islamic studies started having 6 or 7 different strands to it. And so Islamic studies became quite broad. And then after the, and around the 2015 period, for those of you who know, this is the time when, David Cameron was talking about reforming the madrasahs, and there was toxic education taking place in Muslim institutes, and it was a smear campaign. We know now it was a hoax. We're talking about the Trojan horse in particular, and then the repercussions of that and to the madrasahs. But a lot of madrasahs, mashallah, in the last 10 years have started opening up to what I call character building, but a broader term would be social responsibility and experiential learning, and learning, in the community. That change has started taking place in the early 2010s. And for those of you who know, we have been at the forefront of that in terms of advocating that and promoting that, and getting lots of head teachers to understand the importance of learning outside of the 4 walls of the school and applying what they learn. Are we producing future change makers through our madrasahs? That's the question. So coming back to you, Dr. Farah, schools hold up their pupils, especially the alumni who've gone on to do amazing things in the world. And we see a lot of that in the mainstream school. You run 2 schools, mashallah. Faizal, you've been part of a Muslim school, as I've said, but you're also in the mainstream academy. Do we see Muslim institutes, whether they are a faith school or whether they are a madrasa, producing future change makers? Have we seen any, in your experience?
I think first of all, I think this is really, it would be really important to do this as some research systematically, to see where the alumni of the early schools are and what they're doing. Absolutely. And I don't think that's been done as yet. However, if you're asking anecdotally, as in like people that you're aware of, certainly you can see people who are quite active now in different positions and running different types of organizations. I've even seen some names in the chat who went to Islamic schools, full-time Islamic schools. And I can think of a number of people in my, off the top of my head, who are running. For example, one of my ex-students is heading up the Muslim Youth Helpline. And so that she was in a full-time Islamic school at that time, 20 years ago. One of our alumni has just recently won the Charles Parker Prize, which means that her radio documentary is going to, inshallah, be on Radio 4. Wow. And there's an element of Islamic thought in there. Right, so it's not just that she's become successful and she will be, on Radio 4. It's that she's taking an Islamic concept, and that's going to be played on Radio 4. So that, to me, is change makers. Is that people who are having an impact in society. So certainly I would say, yes, absolutely. There are success stories, many success stories, whether they're across the board, whether they're for every child that attends a Muslim school. I don't think we can answer that question yet.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And Brother Faizal, would you like to add anything to that question?
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you very much, Brother Waqaus, for inviting me to this session. It's a very useful session. And what Sister Farah has outlined there actually does encapsulate the main purpose of a faith school. But can I add something onto this?
Yes, of course you can.
Before I come to the question.
Of course you can.
I would say, although these are kind of your overall overarching aims of those schools, but we also have to understand that the diaspora, when they came to the West in particular, it was actually, the main purpose of establishing a lot of those schools was actually preserving. It was preservation, So the different groups came and they actually followed their model of preservation. And then slowly with evolution and the changes in society. And also, I think with I would say broadening of ideas, I think a lot of those institutions have opened up to much more wider communities as well. So I think the other thing is here, it's very important for us to understand, in order to actually see these important points, we need to actually see the evolution of those faith schools over a period of time, because some of those purposes have evolved and have changed.
Absolutely.
And new ones have come in.
Yes.
And I think it's very important for us to actually look into that as well. Another thing, when we talk about future change makers, change makers here, I think we have to look at it from a both macro and micro level. Often we look at the people who are on the media, who are there, who are at the forefront, and that's all great. That's fantastic. But what we also see, that not only just faith schools, but we also have to look at it from a wider Muslim communities as well, is that there are a lot of changes that are happening at a ground level. So for instance, how often do we see some of our students who are taking part in local food banks, and how often we're seeing that our students who are who have grown up and have developed into taking more civic duties, such as becoming local councillors and various others and so forth. Now, of course, as Sister Farah said, that I think there needs to be more research needs to be done on that. I think that would be really good to see. But I do feel that we do need to actually look at that it's not change makers from a bigger perspective, but we also need to look at the small things that are happening that actually culminates into bigger things as well. And one of the beauty of the faith schools and madrasas and so forth, with its limitation, I have to say, or broadly speaking, it does create young people who with a social conscience, and that in itself is the beginning of future change makers.
Very nicely, mashallah, some fantastic perspective there from Brother Faizal in terms of looking at the macro change and the micro change. I hope everybody understood that, inshallah ta'ala, that change makers is not just one level. There's so many different ways, hierarchies, or so many different levels that we've got to serve as individuals, and mashallah, we're producing young people at different levels. And it's absolutely right that what we do need is change makers here. We need research here, which would be fascinating. And I always, when I stumble on something like this and I find something that needs researching, I always think, Ya Allah, extend my life by another 10 more years, and I would love to do a PhD on this to answer this question. There's somebody who's got their hand raised up. Amina, I think it is, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question to our guest panel? Amina, if you want to speak now, unmute yourself. Amina, assalamu alaikum. Okay. Okay. Shakira, assalamu alaikum. I'm just going to let you in. Amina, if you want to come back in, just wait for Sister Shakira. Sister Shakira, you've got your hand up. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, just moving on, guys. If you want to come back, your hands are raised. Please only raise your hand if you want to speak. Inshallah, otherwise put your question or comment in the chat section. I'm going to move on because, as I said, we have so much to cover here. That's for you guys who are not familiar with where schools started and madrasa started and what evolution is taking place. I guess the key thing to understand and take away from those last sort of 5-10 minutes is that the schools that we have set up, as Brother Faizal said, that we came here as minorities, and very early generations, our grandparents, they had the challenge of preserving or preservation of identity or cultural values that they were bringing, and they wanted to instill in the next generation, especially when the first wave of immigration, the first wave when they came here in the 50s and the 60s. And so you can see that, and this is not something just unique to the Muslim community. I was reading Akala, the poet, and he was talking about where he was coming from, the Caribbean, and he would rely heavily. School wasn't for him because it wasn't talking to him, and he was seen as an outsider, but he relied heavily on the Saturday schools, which were, for Afro-Caribbean children. And he relied heavily on that and benefited immensely from that. And one of his big things is that we should have clubs. That's a webinar for tomorrow, but it's not only him. I also have spoken to many friends of mine who from Eastern European friends, and they've spoken about the same thing, that today, in the last 10 years, when they've come here, the schools are not, the schools here are doing their best, but we have to do extra stuff to be able to preserve the identity of our children. And they speak the language that, it may be Polish. So this is fascinating. It's not just unique to us. Somebody else has got their hand raised up again. Who would like to speak? We have 4 people who have their hand raised. Just bear with me. Okay. So Sister Shakira, Amina, if you want to speak, that's great. Sofia Azmat. Assalamu alaikum. Sofia Azmat, please unmute yourself.
Yes, walaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Sofia. How are you?
I'm curious. We're talking about future change makers. So I'm in the US and I work with the Islamic schools here mostly. And in terms of measuring the effect our education system, our programs are having on our graduates, we try to put into place alumni surveys and so forth, and kind of follow these alumni, 5-10 years out after they've left us, to kind of assess what they're doing, where they are now, and whether our programs accomplished what we thought they would accomplish. And I'm curious to know, how are these schools that you're talking about, if the guests, the panelists can speak to that, how are you assessing that these kids are becoming future change makers?
Fantastic. Thank you, Sister Sophia. Thank you very much for that. That's an absolute brilliant question. There was a little bit of, if you look at the slide where it says future change makers, I didn't actually put any pictures of any Muslim children or Muslim young people doing well. There, not to say there isn't any pictures. There are many, mashallah. I left a question mark because of this, what you've just said, because, well, how do we define a change maker? How do you measure that? And I'm really fascinated to hear that you actually do that survey. And I know from my own experience, before I just hand over to Sister Farah and Faizal to comment on that, I know from my own experience of visiting the Makatib, the Madrasahs in the UK, and even the schools I'm talking about here, the Muslim faith schools. Let's take Darulooms, for example. To the Darulooms and the heads, mashallah, the big shuyukh who run the Darulooms in this country, there's about 30 of them. I've put this question to them, that you've been in existence for what, 40 years now, since 1981, which was a big Daraloom that was in Dewsbury. Where are your alumni, and how do you measure where they've gone? And without the data, it's impossible. Without the instruments to measure the research, it's impossible. So my point isn't to get the answers. My point is to question whether we have the instruments in place to be able to measure that. And if not, why not? Because surely it's got to be a good way of measuring efficacy of an institute. Dr. Farah, Brother Faizal, you want to add anything to what Sister Sophia had to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, that schools should be doing those kinds of surveys. It's not something that we're doing at the moment, so it's on our to-do list, which isn't, as you know how long that is, but I agree entirely that is something really important. The only thing I'd say is, and we should definitely do it, is that whereas you can track where kids are and what they're doing, it's a little bit like, and I the points that Brother Faizal and other people have made in the chat about what do we even mean by change makers, really, really significant points. Because it's a little bit like shakhsiyah, is that can it be measured? Is it something that is tangible? Is it something that you can put criteria on in that kind of way? And in fact, I think change making is probably similar to that in some ways. So whereas we can try and do some analysis and try and give some sort of answers to see what's happening and so on. A lot of the kinds of much more intangible things that people have pointed out can't really be quantified, and it's about human relationships, about so many different things. So I think that's it's a really interesting question, which I think needs more attention and needs more time that we could
absolutely.
Yeah, so I would say.
And folks, just to let you, you'll find. Sorry, Brother Faizal, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add to this point. I think broadly speaking in the UK, and I'm very glad that you shared your US experience here, and it's something that I think we can learn from you in the UK. I think broadly speaking in the UK though, it's not just only the Muslim schools or the madrasas, but broadly speaking, the state sector itself is pretty poor in terms of tracking down the alumni and its impact. Now, we as an academy, our MAT, Multi Academies Trust, it's actually fun. It's a City of London. I don't know if most of you probably know City of London, the most powerful square mile in the world. Yeah. So where there's the head office of all the big banks are. They are our they are our owners. They are the ones who own what we call our Multi Academies Trust, and they have schools, but they also have a number of top independent schools. And we went to, myself and one of my colleagues, we went to one of them a few weeks back, and it is a different kind of world. And the way that they track their alumni, it is most amazing. I mean, the board that they have, it's just astonishing. It is really, really astonishing. And then these alumni then come back, they donate money and do all sorts of things and so forth. And most of them become very, very successful people, multimillionaires, and high profile people in different parts of the society. And I think that there's quite a lot of work that we need to be doing in our schools and our society, in our sectors, particularly in Muslim sector, because there are a lot of successful Darul Uloom graduates who have gone on to do lots of successful things, but unfortunately they're not giving back to the sector in the way that they should be giving back. Is because of the lack of tracking and monitoring and getting them back in to provide that service. So yeah, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done in that area.
Funny you say that, because very quickly, because I know we've got to move on, but I did start this exercise for a particular Darul Uloom who wanted to do this. They had to do it because of the need for, I can't remember what the need was at the time, but I remember being given this responsibility, which was very, very unique, and it was like a privilege to get that honor. And when I started tracking the alumni that have graduated between 1990 and 2015, I found that this Darul Uloom had produced a scholar, mashallah, who'd gone on to speak on Capitol Hill in America. And I thought, wow, I mean, this is just amazing. And then I found some amazing things about other scholars who'd gone on, graduates who'd gone on to do amazing things around different parts of the world. And I just remember looking at that exercise for 2-3 months, and it was such a fascinating exercise for me to think it's brilliant, but it's not a common, not every institute does that. I would like to see a bit more of that to be able to measure the impact. But I guess the key debate is what Dr. Farah is saying, is about, well, how do you do that? And is it possible even to look at that? Now, moving on, in terms of those of you who need a snapshot of, look, how many masajid and makatib are there in the country? I don't know if this is relevant, but I wanted to put this in here just so you know where our children go to learn. It's really important to stress this and understand the big snapshot. And I'll do this very, very quickly, unless you want to ask some questions on this. But 95% of British Muslim children don't actually go to a Muslim faith school. A lot of people think that they go to faith schools. They don't go to a faith school. 95%, I think, according to AMS, they go to a mainstream school, and only 4% are attending a Muslim school. And so the numbers are there. That's roughly about 600,000 Muslim learners, according to the census, and merely 25, possibly 30,000 Muslims attend a faith school. So where do they go for tarbiyah of their shakhsiyah or identity, or whichever term you're going to use there in terms of the Islamic tarbiyah. If they're going to mainstream schools, where are they going for the Islamic tarbiyah? Well, only 4% go to Muslim faith school. 45 to 50%, according to a couple of studies, and also our own observational studies at Ilm, because we deal with the top makatib in the country, is well, only 250,000 to 300,000 attend a maktab. So not every Muslim child goes to a maktab or madrasa in the evening. And this has lots of implications, lots of questions about where are they going for ta'aleem, tarbiyah, ta'deeb, for the religious nurturing. It's quite interesting, just to give you sort of an overall snapshot about what is in existence and where do our children go. And I guess the key question we're trying to understand is, why do people send the children to these institutes? Now, I'm just going to touch upon the research that many of you will be aware of because you saw this in webinar 1. But those of you who are not aware of this, so Ilm Tamal has been conducting research now with 1,000 young teenagers. We've got to get up to about 5,000 to 10,000. So these are interim findings. We've done the same research with 1,000 parents, focus groups and surveys. And these are the interim findings, which are quite alarming, but they're not surprising to those people who are actually on the front line. 48% of teenagers feel their madrasas and schools are not preparing them adequately for life. So they feel they are preparing them for life, but not adequately. Over 70% of teenagers do not receive adequate support for the mental health. So that was the biggest part of the crisis, was actually connected to the identity faith crisis, was the mental health well-being, if not more. And 81% of teenagers actually rely heavily more on the madrasa than they do on the school to learn about Islam. And when you put the stats that I put in before, you can understand why. Because madrasas they're not regulated at this point in time, so they have a lot more freedom to do a lot more things which schools kind of don't. And you have teachers here who will tell you that, how tight the curriculum is there. So I want to ask this question now to Dr. Farah, because we know, mashallah, she's done papers on this topic of ta'aleem, tarbiyah, and ta'deeb. Firstly, what is the difference between those three terms in a nutshell? Because you've done a whole lecture on this and papers on this. And I guess the most important thing I'm asking here is, well, who's responsible for what? Because I think what I find in conversations with parents and teachers and researchers, we think that somebody else is doing it, and the other person thinks that we're doing it, and there's a gap in the tarbiyah of the children. So ta'aleem, tarbiyah, ta'deeb, what are they, and who's responsible for what? Dr. Farah.
Okay, I'm really not sure how to answer all these questions that you put together in a few minutes. It's very simplified and probably not a helpful answer would be ta'aleem is the acquisition of knowledge, essentially, or teaching knowledge. That raises the question what we mean by knowledge and what the purpose of knowledge is, and so on. Tarbiyah is usually defined as nurturing and enabling, activating the fitrah so that you can enable a human being to achieve their full potential. So that raises a question about, is tarbiyah just for children? Which I think that is one of the questions you've been raising in this sense of a series of webinars. And ta'deeb, people who know me know that I actually take quite a strong stance on saying the Naguib Al-Das's view on what ta'deeb is, which is he uses that term to encapsulate education as something very, very, very different to what we consider to be education, i.e. Western mass schooling. And even what the kind of maktab and madrasa traditions that we're used to have lost, in his view, the understanding of ta'deeb. Ta'deeb, from his perspective, is it comes through nurturing and inculcation, but it's gaining an awareness of the proper place of things, which essentially is a way of understanding your existence and its relationality, your relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your relationship with yourself, and your relationship with others, which is a very comprehensive way of approaching education. So what I've been saying for 20 odd years, and I'll keep saying, is that actually what our communities need is to engage with Islamic educational philosophy and theory. What I mean by that is both classical, so Ghazalian, Khaldunian, all those kinds of ideas which are so rich and we're just scratching the surface of, And as well as that, any scholars who are engaging with that and trying to bring it into the contemporary times, such as say Naqib al-Atas and say Nasser and many, many other people, there is so much that we could draw on there that we are not drawing on. In terms of whose responsibility it is, it's very, very clear in the Quran, is that there's two clear answers to this. And in Islam, as we know, there's always more than one answer. Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing from Allah. And the first answer I'd say, and there's probably more than two, but let me just say these two. The first answer I would say is that when you're a parent, the gift that you're given from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this human being that's entrusted to you, is an amana that is going to be one of your biggest tests. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about amal and awlad, wealth and children, as the tests of this life. And so when you are gifted this child, you are responsible. You cannot put that responsibility on anybody else. If you are paying a school or a tutor or anybody else to come and support you with that, you're still responsible, because you're the person who has to hold that school and that tutor to account. And there's no two ways about that. That is what each and every one of us who are parents will be asked about. Of course, we have the Islamic principle that you can only do your best, and the outcome is from Allah. And the prophets, Anbiya, were not able to always do what they wanted to do for their children. So it's not to say that, and Allah is all merciful, but to educate your children, you need to educate yourself. You have to do that, and that responsibility is a dual, interrelated responsibility, and we learn through our children. So that's the first way of approaching it. The second way of approaching it is, as Muslims, we are not individualists. We are a communal jama'ah, in which case, the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, one of the key questions for us at the moment is, how do we translate that village into our urban realities?
Beautiful, mashallah. Yes.
So I'll stop there, because I probably could go on forever.
No, it's fascinating. No, absolutely. There's a question here just to say, could you just please repeat what is ta'aleem again? So the distinction between ta'aleem and tarbiyah.
I would say ta'aleem generally, a lot of people will broaden it out, but because once you start unpacking what knowledge is, what ilm is, it becomes much, much broader. But just a very quick answer is that it's the acquisition or the teaching, the inculcation of knowledge, essentially. But that you need a whole conference on that. I can't say more than that.
Folks, don't worry if there's things we're touching upon and they're either not making sense right now, or you want us to dive deep into this. Mashallah, we are planning in the background what Sister Farah just said there. I think to do justice to each module, we're probably going to need a conference, a day long, maybe 2 days long, depending on you guys, how thirsty and hungry you are for the knowledge and the experience and the expertise. We will, inshallah, as an organization like Ilm and many other organizations like Sister Farah's or Nizar Trust, we share the same vision and would be more than happy to put that together for you. If the hunger is there and if you're thirsty for it, we would definitely be willing to do that. Now, so don't worry about that. If you want us to do deep dives, and we're having to rush a little bit here. Brother Faizal, do you want to just is anything you would like to add here? There's something that I'd like to put to you. There's a notion and understanding, and it's being talked about a lot in different circles that I'm moving in. Well, to understand ta'aleem and tarbiyah, one perspective is that, well, tarbiyah should be left with the parents, which is nurturing as the upbringing, in simple terms, is what Sister Farah was talking about. Ta'aleem should then be left to the institutes, the maktab, the school, the madrasahs. This is a perspective that's out there now. And if you have this distinction, you'll be all right, because you're, as parents, taking care of the tarbiyah, and you're preparing them to learn. And then when they go to the schools and madrasahs, they're ready to learn. What is actually happening today is the paradox. The tarbiyah is being outsourced to those institutes. The tarbiyah is not being done at home. So that's why you have broken children. I don't want to call them that, but that's the terminology that's being used, is that you have children coming from broken homes, therefore broken, not a good term. And they are their disruptive learners now. What do you have to say, having been in the Muslim school sector and also now in the mainstream sector? Do you agree with that perspective, that position, or do you think it's a lot more complicated than that?
I
I think just like Sister Sarah, Farah, you have to. I keep on saying Sarah. Sorry, Sister Farah. Going a bit mad. I think the fasting is getting into my head.
Oh, no problem.
You need a PhD on this, don't you? All the questions that you're asking.
I'm sorry, guys. I should be asking this outside of Ramadan. I shouldn't mess you guys.
But in a nutshell, this is what my take is from my observation from working. I mean, in Nida Trust, we've been working, and as you know, we've been working with Muslim schools, not only just here, but also in abroad, Turkey, Qatar, African countries, and so forth. And also we've been doing some work in Europe. I think this might be a little bit controversial. I think we are misunderstanding these terms. And our definitions are based on the secular framework rather than actually going back to our classical tradition. And Professor Rajab actually talks about from Turkey, he talks about this model of continuity of tradition. And I think because due to colonization, due to all the other various factors that has happened to the Muslim world, and also I have to say here, and I'm sorry, I might offend some people here, but it's an academic exercise, this, is that the term Islamization has actually played a big role in secularizing our terms.
Okay.
And this process of Islamization has resulted in schools, and we see this when we look at Islamic schools, and I mean, one of the highest concentration of Islamic schools in London is around where I live. And I see the implementation of these terms. And these are actually set up by big scholars, as you know, Brother Waqaus and Farah, you know this as well, is that you see that the implementation is actually based on the secular methodology. And so as a result of that, our students, our children come out from Islamic school with a dichotomized mindset. And not an integrated one. And so, my view would be for us to actually go back to these terms again and look at it using this whole model of continuity from our tradition. It was very interesting when I went to Spain, and I kind of just observed really, how Islam and whose responsibility was it, to train the community and things like that. Now, in fact, it's like a concentric circle, really. I know, of course, Sister Farah talked about, parents and so forth, and our primary role and so forth. But when we talk about responsibility, actually, it's the responsibility of everyone's, and I think we need to incalculate that vision across everyone's mindset. And Allama Iqbal talks about this as well, is that in order for us to actually make, and in this whole idea, the vision of establishing Pakistan, actually Pakistan isn't a pure stan, pure home, is that everyone is involved in this whole process. Everyone is involved. It's ironic what is happening, but it breaks our heart. But the thing is that that vision was there, is that everyone is in that process of creating these pure souls. You see this pure soul, and everyone has got a responsibility. But unfortunately, because of the way that we have defined the terms and the way that the schools are actually implementing it, and the way that I have to say the Islamic scholars are implementing it as well, I have to say it is done within the secularist paradigm and not within the Islamic paradigm that we're supposed to be doing it.
Thank you very much. No, it's a very important point, and we've had conversations on this many times over, and I think it was important to share that on this particular slide. I'm just conscious of the time. I do want to get into the crux of the conversation, which we already have done actually, but moving into part two, which was, well, that brings us to the question, follows on nicely from what you're saying about, well, if the terminology and understanding of key concepts in Islamic education are questionable or they need, a revision, then are the schools and madrasas that we are sending our children to fit for purpose today? We talk about them being fit, are they future-proof and what they're doing for the future? There's a bigger question that needs to be asked, which is about being fit for purpose today. Now, Ustad Idris Khamisa, mashallah, who again is another He doesn't need an introduction. He was here with us in the last webinar. He's also a very honorable ustad to, I guess, 3 of us, mashallah. The question really is whether in establishing these institutions do we as educators see ourselves as agents of changes or change, or is making our learners future change makers part of the vision of our institutions? So that's a question that Ustad Idris has put there. There are a couple of other questions around there. Dr. Farah, somebody's asking for your link to your work on Ta'aleem, Tarbiyah and Ta'aleem. If you have
I have put a link in the Q&A, and I'll put it in the chat as well. The problem with academic papers is that they're behind paywalls. If you get in touch with me, there are ways for me to send things to you, but not everything is available freely. But I will also put in about our schools where a lot of some basic ideas are there. So I'll put that in the chat in a minute, inshallah. But just to sort of pick up on where we are, because I think that what Ustad Faizal was talking about, it really does kind of address the question that you're posing, which is about fit for purpose, right? Mm-hmm. I think that I think these are really valid criticisms, because there are lots of very deep issues that need to be addressed. Nevertheless, I think it's really important to understand why we're in the situation we're in. And that is because we're living in a post-colonial period, and we haven't come out of that yet. We're nowhere near out of that yet. And the continuity that is necessary and must be rebuilt, and again, Professor Rajab Sentruk is another great inspiration in this, as are others. It's trying to deal with ruptures which in different parts of the world have manifested themselves in different ways. Even Islamization as a term, I mean, it's got more than one meaning. Different people have approached it in different ways. One of our key issues is that the educators in our schools are not equipped to deal with any of this. And so teacher education is a really, really important aspect of it, because you will know, Ustad, that you can have the best curriculum in the world.
Yeah.
If the teacher doesn't understand it and doesn't understand what you're trying to do, it will go nowhere. And you could have a teacher who really grasps, doesn't know the term as Islamization or any of this kind of other stuff, but grasps what, has had maybe even a very traditional tarbiyah that really gives them that sense of they embody Islam, and they know how to manifest that, and they know how to raise children, and they're able to do things without all the theory and without all of that. Of course, it can be enhanced, but there's so many different ways of thinking about this. But definitely, as a community, we're nowhere near in a position where we're able to meet our children's needs right now, let alone in the future. And the future is changing minute by minute. And we are not on top of that. So I would definitely say that. I just want to address this question about neuroscience, which is in the Q&A, which I think is a really fascinating question and very important question.
Mashallah. Yes.
And the thing is that this it kind of answers what Ustad Faizal was saying, not answers, but addresses what Ustad Faizal was saying. The whole problem is that neuroscience is built upon a paradigm, it's built on a worldview, it's built on a particular way of understanding what exists as just material. So therefore this the brain, the cognitive and all of that is a material object that can be manifested in a particular kind of, and then dealt with and understood in a particular kind of way. Our Islamic tradition looks at aql in a very, very different kind of way. So whilst I actually feel that, yes, we need to engage with neuroscience, you can't ignore it, but we need the expertise of understanding, just even a basic understanding of different approaches to what we mean by aql, and the spiritual dimension of that, the fact that it's in the qalb, what the qalb is, the spiritual heart is a thinking organ, the fact that, insan is Haywan al-Natiq, what that means, what language is, the fact that when we talk about thinking, we don't always talk about language, we talk about surah. These seem to be like really deep philosophical concepts, but actually Darul Uloom students are aware of them because they study the texts that they're mentioned in, but they don't necessarily know what the implications of those are. So really, it's a case of we've got to start from the bottom up in lots of ways, but that doesn't mean that we kind of dismiss what's happening, because there's so much good going on the ground as well. And
yes,
I think that really needs to be sort of brought out. I'm talking about so many different things. Inshallah, I'll pass on back to you now, inshallah.
Thank you very much, sister, for that. Brother, Sister Shakira, I think you had your hand raised. I just want to make sure that I'm not ignoring you. If I have unmuted you, if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to ask a question, please do. Otherwise, just take your hand off. It's confusing me. It's raised up, and it's been raised up for a while now. So if you could, please, inshallah. Thank you, Sister Shakira. Right. Sorry, Brother Faizal.
Brother Waqaus, can I just
you can. I was going to ask you to come. I was going to ask you to come back onto that.
Just with regards to this question, I think fit for purpose, I think is a big term, isn't it?
It's a big term. It is a big term.
What is that purpose? You see, I think that's another question. Is what is that purpose? What is it that, as I have said, the purpose has evolved in depending on the schools and the context of Darul Ulooms. They had their purpose is slightly different from Islamic schools and from the evening schools, weekend schools, and all sorts of variety of schools that are kind of growing up here in the UK. And I'm sure maybe possibly in other Western countries similar models as well. But if we actually then put it, this idea that, what in the past, from my little reading, what I understood it to be is that the idea of this institution, and if we look at Madrasahs Nizamiya, for instance, that Nizam al-Mulk actually set up, in Baghdad, with Imam Waqaus Ali being the vice principal at that time, and then there are others that are established, which actually the curriculum of Darul Ulooms of Deoband and others actually takes part of this, but if we look at the kind of what is it that Nizam al-Mulk was trying to create, at that time? What was it that Imam Waqaus Ali and others were trying to create at that time? I'm just taking that as a kind of a snapshot, really, but we can look at other places as well. And I understand it from what I kind of read up on this, is that it is this idea of al-insan al-kamil. This idea of this perfect human being, and that human being is modeled around Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And Allama Iqbal talks about this whole idea of Mard al-Mu'min, this perfect human being, this a real believer, deep rooted, and going back to Sister Farah's point about somebody who's deep rooted in not only just your traditional akhliyat knowledge and things like that, but actually more involved in spirituality and all sorts of things. It's like a perfect human being. So if we actually take these kind of terms and then we kind of bring it back to our Western context, is our institution fit for purpose?
Yes.
I would say partially, yes, there are some, and going back to Sister Farah's point, yes, there are some really, really good things that are coming through, and Alhamdulillah, and we see that, and we see the wonderful, individuals that it is creating. But is that enough? I don't think it is. And so therefore, it does actually need for us to actually look at the whole process again and retweak and tweak things, not necessarily overhaul change, and some people might actually think that, we need to change everything. That's not the case. There's a lot of great things that are happening. It's actually tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. But that requires people willing to listen, people willing to change, people willing to, accept that there are weaknesses. And that's a mindset shift that we need to actually create in our community. And I think this question wouldn't have been asked if we can actually change that mindset in our community.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely 100% you're on point there. Changing the mindset is actually harder. And those who work in the front line, and they've been working for years, will be able to tell you that. And you surely have been one of those people, that changing the mindset will take years, if not decades, possibly impossible at times. So that's a good place to, I guess, move on from there. Now, we don't have much time. We're just under 11 minutes, and I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, I guess, around the conversation, around the key questions. And it's very difficult to do justice to them. We know that, but we're sparking the conversation, and we're kind of laying down the foundations, I guess, for further research. It's inquiry-based learning. We're looking at what things we don't have to be able to answer the questions, and that will spark curiosity. It will also, I'm jotting things down as we're speaking about things that the Muslim leaders in the education sector, Islamic education sector, need to be looking at. And with someone like Dr. Farah and Faizal online, mashallah, and joining us, integral part of this conversation is that you have people who are connected to institutes and leaders in their own right and doing things in terms of driving change from the top. And organizations like Ilm to Amal who partner with them and work with them on the ground in a collaboration, we're the ones who should be taking the notes about where the gaps lie and what we need to be filling, from here. So there's lots of curiosity, lots of food for thought to take away, inshallah ta'ala. Sorry, we don't have 10 minutes. We have, this webinar's been 90 minutes, not the usual 75, sorry. We have just over 20 minutes, inshallah. Now, this question is something that I think I should put here, because it's come up in the conversations that I've been having. So again, just to remind everybody, for the last 6 months, what I've done since September is got out and about as COVID restrictions were easing off, and I've gone around focus groups. Now, I've sat with young girls from 13 onwards right through to 21, 24, and young boys who most of them attend Muslim faith schools, and some were actually in mainstream school. And the conversation we were having, something like, I think we had 20, 30 questions, really difficult questions, intense questions, some of the ones you kind of seeing on screen with the young people. And the sentiment and the feedback was quite alarming, because even for someone like myself who's been in the field or the front line for a number of years now, and I'm aware of the identity crisis, it was an eye-opener, because they were telling you things that we as adults assumed were the problem, but actually they were talking about something completely different, or something that was a lot more deeper than that. And the question kept coming up was, and we put this question to them, that do you feel the school that you attend or the madrasa that you attend is part of the problem and part of the solution? And I've already cited to you some of the stats at the beginning, which I brought early on, but it's a follow-on from here, that there is an identity crisis taking place in young people. Identity, again, I know, Sister Farah, you're absolutely right. It's a political term and has different connotations, and we could be talking about the shakhsiyah. But it was alarming, and this is a question, I'm throwing this question in. I mean, the interim stats are there, and other people have cited different things, but it all sort of points to the conversation that, well, the identity crisis our teenagers in particular having. Sorry, I should have stressed, I've interviewed teenagers, and there was a lot of concern around, well, are Muslim schools even aware about some of the issues that the girls are talking about? So young girls are talking about gender inequality, and they're talking about that at the school as well as their home. Are parents aware of that? Madrasahs, in terms of the mental capacity, the physical capacity for them to learn is different for boys. And they were talking about other issues. So this report hasn't been published yet. We're still in the interim stages, as I mentioned. It will be quite heavy in some of the findings. And it's quite, there's a lot of variables. My question to throw in here is identity crisis are we part of the problem in the schools and the madrasas, or are we part of the solution? And if you go back to the statistic I said to you, that over 80%, I think, if it was, I can't remember on the early slide, where there were, I'm sure it was 4 in 5 said to me, and even in the survey opinions from 1,000 responses, was that actually, where do you go to have your questions and your doubts around your values and your beliefs, and whether it's a faith identity or a mental health crisis, where do you go for support? And you could see that many of them, none of them, very few said school. That's the first thing. And most of them, many of them said school is the problem. Most of them said, well, madrasa is a problem, but out of the two, we'd probably go to the madrasa. So I'm just relaying and throwing that in there. Anybody want to comment on that? Identity crisis, are the schools part of the problem, and the madrasa is part of the problem, or part of the solution? I think we get a mixed opinion from the young people. they do see them as a part of the problem, but they also see them part as a solution. Two people have got their hands raised. Sorry, I should be taking. Sophia, I'll just unmute you again.
Yes, Assalamualaikum. I think one of the things we have to do is really make sure that we have good communication channels within the school, because and I'm speaking from anecdotal data that I have from Islamic schools in the US. I get calls from parents saying that, you know, this is happening with my child, and I have tried going to administrators or teachers, whatever, and it's not being addressed. And oftentimes it is where maybe girls are being treated differently than boys.
Yes. Yep.
And, you know, I don't have a solution to this. I can say definitely this is a problem. And sometimes our board of trustees or leaders, school leaders are, I would say, hesitant for whatever, and sometimes they don't realize it, to acknowledge that this is a problem. So we're just trying to sweep it under the rug. So yes, I see this in the US.
Thank you
Solution,
so much.
we have some. First, one big one is having grievance policies in your handbooks that are clearly communicated, and then being open to actually following them. That's all I'll say.
Thank you so much for confirming. Thank you for that shared perspective, because this is, again, it will vary from town to town and country to country, but yeah, it's concerning, and it needs a lot more research. And I guess, Dr. Farah, that's the question you were posing yesterday about the importance of. Yesterday was, sorry for those who weren't there, a conference that you held at the University of Cambridge, and you brought world leaders in education, mashallah, together. And the second question that you were posing there was that how important, or what use and support will educational research do to people's practices on the ground, so the teachers in the schools and the madrasahs. And this was going through my mind as I was moderating one of the groups, was that actually the research on the ground, that we need a lot of research to inform our understanding of the problems, because forget the solutions for a minute, we don't understand what the issues are in young people. And that's one of the biggest things that's come out of my 6-month experience so far in action-based research, is what young people are going through and what the adults think is happening, radically different, like not even marginally, radically different. And then we can't take boys and girls to be the same. There's different issues altogether, different identity crises or root causes for each one. So that was interesting. Sorry, Ibrahim Saluji, I'm sorry, I've kept you waiting. I'm just going to let you in to unmute yourself. You've got your hand raised. Please, could you unmute yourself? You've got your hand raised. Ibrahim Saluji from South Africa, I think. Okay. Anybody who want to add anything from our panel on this point about the identity crisis? There's more people who've got their hand raised now. Sorry. Dr. Farah?
Yeah, I mean, sorry. Okay. I think what Sister Sophia said, is really, really important.
Important, yeah.
And what she's saying is this, is that if you, from what you've said, and I know this is on the ground, is that kids are talking about things and thinking about things in ways that we don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not that we can't understand it, it's that we need to make the effort to understand it.
Absolutely.
And parents have concerns that we didn't have when we were parents at their stage, right? And we need to make the effort to understand it. And one of the key things that we need is to have open channels in our communities, not just in school structures, but just in our communities. And this is where I was saying earlier about Jama'ah, about taking a village to raise a child, is that every child that's got a problem needs to be able to have somebody that they can go to. And we can be those people, but also older teenagers can do that for the tweens, for the sort of 10, 11-year-olds, because it starts early. Mm-hmm. It really starts early. Mm-hmm. And the complexities of this are immense. Children are under so much pressure from so many different areas in ways that we never were. Mm. And that's why the saying of Imam Ali, teach a child for a time that is not your time, is so, so important, because anybody who's engaging with children or young people has to be open to listening.
Yes.
And when you listen, you suddenly begin to start understanding what it is that, so how do we give them that space? Now, my work, as a lot of you know, is around Shakhsiyah and Halakha. So Halakha being this, traditional form of Islamic learning where you sit on the floor in a circle. And what we do in our schools, which I put into the chat as well as the Q&A, is we give the children that time daily to talk in this circle. And what that does is, because you build up over time a trust with the teacher and with the other people in the class, kids are able to bring their issues in there. And when we say their issues, they're not just randomly bringing issues. So we might, for example, be talking about an Islamic topic. It could be zakat, it could be sabr, it could be hajj, anything. But that will, we talk about that in a conceptual way. And then we say to children, okay, tell us your experiences and anything that you want answers to. And that then gives them an opening to start asking the questions. And that allows them, gives them that space to do that. Now, it's not, in some ways, it's a really easy thing to do. In some ways, it's a really difficult thing to do. Because my research is based in a wider field called educational dialogue. And actually, teachers find it, not just Muslim teachers find it really, really hard to let go.
Yes.
They find it really, really hard to give children that space. And there's, Alhamdulillah, the good thing is there's decades now of research of techniques that you can use and how to support teachers and so on. And one of the things I'm doing, which inshallah, I'll be running a free course for anybody who's interested, and I'll put the details into the information, is running a free course on how to do this. And so the thing is that I agree with you, we've got to have the research, and you know how passionate I am about that, right? So it's just the whole event yesterday was about it, and that research has to feed into our work. But at the same time, until we've got the research, until people have access to it, or people have time to understand it, it's about something really, really simple. Give children and young people time and listen and try to understand. And only when you've understood will you know how to then tackle it. And every child is different, and everyone's got their own sort of perspectives and issues, but they all need you to be there for them, if that makes sense. I hope you find that useful.
Very useful, because I can tell you now that's, I mean, you don't need to know this because you know this. What Dr. Farah has said there, folks, every focus group that I did 12 of these, and in each one there was like between 8 to 12 young people. Every single person, when you ask them about the solution as to what the problem is to your dilemma or your identity crisis or whatever you're going through right now, what's the solution? They all pointed to being valued, the need to be being valued by the parents at home and by the teachers at school and in madrasa. In other words, what they were asking for was, for once, an opportunity to stop teaching and listen to what their needs are and what their frustrations are, and rather than giving the answers, let us ask the questions. And it reminded me of what the famous quote from John W. Gardner, where he said many, many years ago, we're talking decades ago now, the American psychologist, I think it was, John W. Gardner, you will know this, Sister Farah, and Faizal, you would have heard this. It's one of my all-time favorite quotes, where he says, education is monumentally ineffective, because far too often we are giving our children cut flowers when what we should be doing is teaching them how to sow their own seeds. And that kept ringing in my head as young people were talking and opening up. And all they wanted was what you said there, was a safe, open space, to be open channels of communication, as Sister Sophia was talking about, you know, really to engage in a conversation. They wanted the learning to be a conversation and discussion, and they wanted to be part of that learning as opposed to a recipient of it. So this is some of the big things that were coming out. Now, just conscious of time, there is a question. What would you say in one line? So Brother Faizal, if I could put this to you, what would you say in one line is the problem with the education system right now? Sister Farah, I'll come back to you as well, because I think that's the key.
But I would look, I'm quite passionate about this idea. Can I just say a few words, if you don't mind?
Of course you can.
Yeah, about this identity. This term identity is a new one. It's a very, again, I mean, we have to go back to the word, the definition of this identity. And I understand the point that you're raising. And one of the areas that I see now, there's a number of things. I think we are all going through identity crisis in some way.
Of course.
Yeah. And children in particular, all the children are going through identity crisis. Okay. But it is particularly acute for Muslim children. For a number of reasons. One of them is, again, going back to the continuity. model, which is that the Muslim children and the Muslim community, there has been a break in there has been a broken chain of almost 300 years. And they're trying to rediscover that. And it's becoming a big problem, and they're trying to navigate through all these issues. I mean, I give you my own personal experience, actually, with my own children. You know, there was on the Islam channel, there was this documentary that they did about how Bengal was conquered by the Turks and so forth, and now often what has happened is that they've grown up with an idea, you know, the Bengali community have grown up with an idea that they were kind of a little bit inferior to, this is something that is real. They've grown up with this idea that they are, you know, a little bit inferior from the Indians and the Pakistanis and so forth, because they had all the big monuments and so forth. Then we come to realize that, in fact, some of the biggest thinkers and reformers were actually Bengalis. Now, my children then actually felt really proud, and then some of the historical monuments that was established in Calcutta and others and so forth, that was actually the hub of this development. They were so proud. They were proud to be called who they were. And then came to the whole idea, okay, we are Bengali, they're from there, but then we are here. We have got another side to us. And then comes the whole idea of how does Islam actually develops all of those things. And as a result of that, I have regular conversations. So this identity crisis will continue to exist until we actually develop this continuity model in our institutions, in our communities, and go back to our tradition, and then develop a mindset amongst our youth that they have a wonderful, glorious history. The emotional attachment, some of the things that you're talking about, that there's space for them to talk about and this and that, these are kind of practical things that we can do. But there's something much more profound that we as a community need to do, which is to actually for us to revive our traditions. And if we can do that, the identity, we can never get rid of identity crisis, but we can minimize it. The current education system is not devised to do that. It's not devised to do that. It's actually in the contrary to some of those things. It actually came as a rebellion to some of our historical evidence, whether we like it or not. But the issue is that there are some synergies there, and we can actually work with it. And we as a community need to kind of become aware of this, and we need to work with those systems and then use those systems to actually then bring our traditions back as well, because this is also our society. This is our home as well. Sorry, was that controversial?
That was brilliant. That was anonymous attendee.
Dr Farah was laughing.
I'm agreeing with pretty much everything you said. The reason I'm laughing is that if I give one-line answer, the problem with our education system is that we think schools are education. They are not.
Yeah, they are. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't laughing either. I was agreeing. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely agreeing with what Ustaz Faizal was saying, is that the problem is that we think, let's just stop and think for 2 minutes, okay? Up until about 120 years ago, children didn't go to school.
Yeah, yes.
We had maktabs or madrasahs, whatever you want to call them. They're totally different things. The fact that our children now spend 7 to 8 hours a day in school is not the norm for humanity, that for Muslims, full stop, but for humanity. And modern schooling is not education. Modern schooling is a social movement to harness people as capital to build industry. The challenge that emerged out of the 19th century, the challenge that modern schooling is facing is not from Islamic education. It should be, because Islamic education has got answers.
Yep.
But the challenge that it's facing is that we're moving from an industrialized society to a knowledge-based society, and schooling isn't keeping up. But the biggest problem that we have as educators is schools. And that might sound really, really radical. And I'm afraid, I don't know if I've taken your point far too far, Brother Faizal. You may feel that I've taken it where you didn't want to take it, but this is something that I believed when I started home educating my children like 25 years ago, is that it's the schools that are the problem. Having said that, I ended up founding schools, which because they were both, because we were home educating mums, and every year they become more and more what we were trying to challenge. Yeah. So I'm not dismissing all the amazing work that people are doing, whether there's Muslim teachers in state schools, whether there's people trying desperately to get full-time Muslim schools running and operating. And there's some amazing work, whether they're doing in madrasahs, whether all those aunties or uppers or whatever who are just simply educating kids in the home together, collectively doing little halakha here and there. I'm not taking any of that away. But if we really want to think about what the problem is that this contemporary Western model of education is totally at odds with what we as Muslims have traditionally done and believed in and excelled at, inshallah.
Thank you so much for both of you on that. See, anonymous attendee, you asked for 1 minute or one line, and you were given several minutes, and two comprehensive answers, which I think many of us will share. Riyadul Ilm, you've asked for, can we shed some light on what the gaps are and what immediate changes can madrasas and maktab start making after this session? In many ways, that's important, and I really do hope that it was as simple as that. You know, in terms of the changes we can make to fix the bigger, broader issues. These are deep-rooted issues, as my two honorable guests have been mentioning. Now, we don't have much time to go into this, but this is what you were talking, you know, when you're talking about the Kamil Insan, the ideal personality, the one who's capable, the one who's holistic, well-rounded. Well, when we look at Imam Ghazali and we look at the various scholars my speakers have been mentioning, we look at education that's more than just the mind, more than the aql, more than just the intellect. And you know, we have the heart, the ruh, the soul, sorry, the qalb, and the jism, the body. And education needs to really, well, as a starting point, be more than 1D or even 3D or 5D. 7D, and this is something that Ustad Akram Kanchima has been working on, and many people in Iber and Ustad Idris, who's also here, many of our Muslim and Western scholars have been looking at education that's holistic, which is as a starting point 7D, and I say as a starting point because there's many other things that we can add to this. But really, M-SPICES is an acronym that stands for moral, spiritual, physical, intellectual, cultural, emotional, and social development of learners, developing the potential in these 7 areas. Now, if we just take that, rather than getting into an argument about other things we can add in, there's definitely other things that we can add in there, which will complicate it. But if you just take that as a 7D definition of human development, as a blueprint, then the question we're asking ourselves is, well, do our institutes prepare children holistically based on this framework, just on as a starting point on this framework? Are our institutes producing the children on this? And again, we don't have time. I'm just putting this question out there. The person who asked, Riyadul Ilm, you asked about, well, what can we do in terms of, you know, the changes that we need to start making? And Brother Faizal mentioned about tweaking. You know, it's not ideal, but we're going to be making lots of tweaks to get it to the ideal, or minimize the identity crisis, or minimize the loss that we have, because it's not ideal. So one of the biggest, and we were having this conversation, Sister Farah and I, in the preamble, that one of the biggest areas that we're going to need to focus, and this is coming in the research again, just look at the bottom parts, that's opinions from young people. All I'm doing here is relaying back 6 months of hard work of listening exercise from young people, and the relief that they had just having a question asked to them. You know, I know they were missing maths and English, right, for an hour or 2 hours, they were enjoying that. But they had this sense of relief, like their opinion mattered. And they were very, very grateful. They're still in touch with me. And, 82% is not a joke. 88% is not a joke. It's not, it's something really serious, where they say that they feel the curriculum is not only too narrow, there's other things I can add to that, because there's a number of questions we did around the curriculum. It's out of touch. It's not just narrow. Narrow is one thing. It's out of touch. It's not in context to their life. Why they're learning X, Y, Z when we're never ever going to use it. And I know madrasa students use this example of the cat falling in the well, and how many buckets of water are we going to need that to purify it? you know, they often use this, the madrasa students use this, that, well, I went through education, Islamic education in madrasas, and this is what we were talking about. It wasn't so long ago, believe it or not, for the South Africans, mashallah, and I don't mean any offense by this, we are so grateful for what you did for us when we didn't in the UK have our own curriculum, and also thanks to Iqra in America. It wasn't so long ago that our children in the UK, in madrasa, were learning from books that were made in South Africa for the South African market, India, Zamzam Academy for the Indian market, Iqra for the American market. We didn't have anything in the UK, and they were learning about money matters in the South African, is it Rand? A different currency. It wasn't sterling. And so just stop for a second and let that sink in for a bit. I'm talking only about 5 to 10 years ago. Our children in this country were spending their time learning about stuff. It just wasn't related. And today you can still walk into madrasas and maktab and find those books being taught. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, they were there when we had nothing. But the question still remains is about, is a school and madrasa curriculum still relevant to the needs of our children? Is it too much? Is there any space for more? Is it too little? Is it just right? These are conversations that academics, researchers, educationalists are having about the curriculum. Ofsted are having this about the curriculum. Young people, for sure, I'm just relaying to you now, that they feel bored and there's no movement, there's no excitement, there's no curiosity. Ustad Idris will tell you there's no creativity, as will the author of this book, who's passed away, Sir Ken Robinson. It's one of the books I will recommend at the end. You know, creativity, and you mentioning about schooling there, Sister Farah, absolutely spot on, that it's our right to be educated, not schooled. You know, there's a difference between education and schooling kills creativity, as the famous TED talk goes. Now, that's a big area, and again, we're not going to do justice to this. You know, folks, we're going to need to do a conference on this at some point. As an amana for these for our brothers and sisters, we're going to have to do a conference at some point this year. I'm going to move on from here to the last sort of 5 minutes that we have. We've just gone on over time. I apologize. I'm just going to wrap this up from both of you to ask you about advice that you can offer to Muslim parents, first and foremost. So let's start with Muslim parents and then go to Muslim educators. For example, we have the maktab teachers who are asking questions about what can they take away from this webinar that they can implement straight away. So this is a question I get often asked by parents. You know, do I send my child to a Muslim faith school? Do I homeschool them? Do I send them to a mainstream school? What can I do? And then there's others who say, well, what factors should I consider before choosing to send my child to a particular school? Is there anything that you would like to add to this slide before we move into giving nasiha at the top 3 priorities for Muslim parents and top 3 priorities for educators to do in order to prepare the children holistically for the future? Anything you want to add to this slide in terms of considerations? We have teacher credentials, we have looking at their curriculum, the extracurricular activities that people can look at in terms of choosing a school. Anything else you would like to add to this?
I think some people have put in the chat things about schools' mission statements and so on, but essentially the school's ethos.
Yep.
And what is the school set up to do? What's the vision and mission of the leaders? That's a very easy question to ask. And you can also, you can gauge when somebody's just reading off a list that they don't really think about that often, when somebody's actually thought about it. And it's the ones who've actually thought about it, even if you don't agree with them. I'd say the ones who've actually thought about it, if you can live with what they're saying, they're actually going to be doing something in that school which is much more meaningful than people who haven't really thought about what their vision, mission statement or ethos is, because then they're just tick boxing, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So Brother Faizal?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I would say that, yeah, you look at all the conventional stuff, you know, these are all the schools have it, you know. If I was choosing a Muslim school, I would actually go in there and see how the receptionists address you. See whether the school is clean. When you're walking around, see if the adults, observe the facial expression. It will say a lot about them being as a human being, as well as whether they're really happy and enjoying in that place. And observe the facial expression and body language and the way that the students present themselves when you are there. If they are happy, if they are presenting themselves well, if they're articulate, if they are comfortable in their talk when they're talking, and you get that feel, I would say look at those salient features. All the schools have got their, vision statement, curriculum, everything. These are routine stuff that you will look at. But I would say that look at those small things, because it's a sunnah, smile, cleanliness. If those two things are there, everything else will be fine, because those little things matters.
Fantastic, two perspectives there. Very quickly, anecdote on this. I was invited to a institute, I won't mention which one, and they had an inspection coming up where they were inadequate, and they were getting another inspection coming up by Ofsted inspector. So I'm just going to give you the Ofsted's perspective on this one. And so I was called in as someone who can come in and save this organization last minute, and I couldn't. And as I arrived, the Ofsted inspector arrived at the same time, and we were taking our shoes off, putting them on the rack, because it was a seminary type of school. And as we both entered, everything that you said, Brother Faizal, about the reception, the ambience, the look, even the scent or the smell of I could see this inspector next to me taking it all in. And we sat down, and he said, where's the bathroom, please? If you don't mind me asking, where are the toilets? So he was pointed to the toilets. He went there. He came back after like 5 minutes. So he actually didn't go to the toilet. He didn't wash his hands or did nothing like that. He just went to the toilets, came back, he sat down. And I asked him a question. I said, what's your first impressions? Do you make a decision within the first impressions? And he said, the first impressions, last impressions. And then it's down to the institute and the head teachers to be able to convince me otherwise. I could see on his face that this school has immediately failed its inspection. And later, when we had a chat about this, interestingly, many weeks later, as you know, the report comes out, it did fail its inspection. And in the report, actually said that the policies and the procedures that these guys have for the basic things, like putting gel into, the gel that you use to wash your hands. This is before COVID, right? Those things are missing, which show that there's a leadership fault. There's a fault with the bigger issues. There's a bigger failing at the top. Simple things, like you're saying, that gel, the soap, sorry, the soap gel that you use in hand sanitizers in the bathrooms and toilets. Something simple like that was used as a way to assess schools. There was a hand up. I should go to a hand up. Sorry, there was a hand up by someone here. Who's got their hand up? Fazana, do you have your hand up? You've also posted a question. Do you want to unmute yourself? Fazana? Okay. You have a question, but you also have a hand up. Anybody else? Tasneem Umarji, you have your hand up. Assalamu alaikum. Tasneem, assalamu alaikum. Umarji? No? Okay, hands down. Right. Okay. Right, folks. So, okay, two very good perspectives on that, I think. I'm going to ask you both to maybe say a couple of things, last two sort of points, I guess, to give our participants some things to take back with them. I think we've heard a lot about parents. If you could just go to the schools and the madrasahs. I'm not saying that the challenges are the same. I'm sure there is similarities and there are differences. Sorry, Sister Farah, I know you've got to go. So if you could just, I start with yourself, inshallah. What are your top 3 priorities for improving schools and madrasas? I've got what we teach and how we teach, because that's where we started the conversation many weeks ago. But what would you say are your top 3 priorities for Muslim institutes to consider in terms of reformation and change for the future?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say some words of encouragement that keep doing what you're doing, because you know you do it for the sake of Allah, right? So please don't feel discouraged by the fact that there's a long way to go in terms of where we need to get to as a community. And the thing is that life is about always moving forward and improvement. This is, as Muslims, this is what we believe, that we're here to grow, we're here to develop. We never reach Insan al-Kamil, right? The only person who did that was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as individuals, as communities, as schools, we just have to keep going, and we have to do our best. We have to be constantly learning. So that's the first thing I'd say. And I think in terms of what we teach is that we need to teach children to choose to be Muslim. And that seems like a contradiction. So what you don't necessarily teach that, but you facilitate it and you support it and you enable it to happen. That's the first thing I would say, is that our children need to understand why they're Muslim, and they need to commit to Islam for themselves. And to do that, we have to be very courageous, because that means actually acknowledging that there are other options. And the reason we have to acknowledge that is, sadly, young people are being pulled in other directions. So that's the first thing. Once we've done that, then we need to understand what the key sort of knowledge that they need to have about the Islamic worldview, the kind of framework through which as Muslims we look at and understand the world, and then how to apply that in their lives and their existence. Now, this might seem like there isn't a list here of what to teach, but that is actually if we can get those constructs right, then what you're putting into that begins, but that's how you approach it. So that's what I would say in terms of what to teach. And in terms of how to teach, there's so much, but relationships are key. So if we didn't have schools, what did we have? We had the ustad and or even the murid or the learner or the talib, the relationships, right? The relationship is essential, and that you have to understand, and that has to be cultivated. And what I always say to our teachers is that you're the adult. Even if this is a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, you're older, right? So the onus is on you to take. You should have more knowledge and better shakhsiyah, and the onus is on you to cultivate and create those relationships. Okay, and so that relationship between you and that learner, between learners and amongst themselves, the learners and the school, the learners' relationship with themselves, which is where the self-esteem comes in, where the mental, this mental health issues, it just disappears if you actively do these things in the first place. And then the niyyah, the intention behind where you're teaching. I could go on. There's so much to say. Inshallah, I just do want to say that one of the things I'm doing, if you can allow me a couple of minutes.
There is actually, sorry to interrupt you there, because there's one quick question, there's a quick comment for you. The question you might want to take. Dr. Farah, is the Shakhsiyah curriculum open source? If not, which open source ones would you recommend for those outside the UK? I know that's a question that only you can answer. Yeah. I
would say that the Ilm to Amal curriculum, bar some things that I'm going to discuss with Ustad Waqaus about, is an amazing curriculum. I would say that the Shakhsiyah curriculum, please grant us, make dua for us, because we have been meaning to make it accessible for some time. And what we're doing, what I can say, there's a couple of things coming up. One is that there are some Quran halaqah, which in Ramadan will be circulating on our website, so you'll be able to access them from there. Very basic stuff, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. We do have a broad curriculum, which we can sort of, but I would say go to those first, but then where you're going to find support is the course, which is going to be based on this platform. So I put the platform in the chat a while ago. Basically what I'm doing, it's actually part of my research, but I'm going to be running a free online 6-week course, which is asynchronous, which means that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can do it in your own time. There's no set times to do it. And it's going to be around how to use halaqah to develop shakhsiyah. And that is the best that I can do to support schools right now, because that's my focus, inshallah. And then once I've got that sorted and so on, then I'm supposed to be moving on to developing our curriculum so that it's more accessible to other people, inshallah. Because at the moment it's a messy thing. If you work in schools, you know that your work is quite messy and you've got to sort it all out and make it accessible. And we haven't quite managed to do that yet, inshallah. So yes, if anybody's interested, in you can please do log on and try and join this free course, the trial that we're running. And the idea of that is to develop our practice, but also to develop the course, and inshallah it will stay free. But yeah, that's what I would say, is that that's what I can do to help and support at the moment, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Sister Farah. I know you've got to go, and there's a comment for you to leave on. I think it's a good one to say thank you so much for what you've done and your time that you've given us. Dr. Farah is a genius, mashallah. Hope you keep doing the great work you are doing, inshallah.
Inshallah, this actually, there's many people, mashallah, across the world doing some amazing things. And I think that what's wonderful is webinars like this, when you can, bring people together and make that accessible. So jazakallah khair for having me, inshallah.
Barakallah fiki. Thank you so much, Sister Farah. I know you got to go.
Okay,
Thank you for your time, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Brother Faizal, you're still with us for a couple of more minutes, inshallah. I do
Yes,
want
inshallah,
to,
no problem.
I do want to hear what you have to say. So top 3 priorities for the schools and madrasas.
I think, I think, I think the schools probably know what their priorities are, but I would just like to say that, those technicalities, the things that they, on operational stuff that they have to do to improve their schools and so forth, that's quite, it's known to the educators. But what I would actually say is that we need to actually go back to what is it that we're trying to achieve. And I would like to actually kind of bring in an idea here that Professor Rajab talks about, is this whole idea of creating leaders for open civilization. Now, are our schools and our institutions, whichever they may be, okay, whether they are normal school or weekend schools or evening schools or masjids or whatever, are they ready to create the leaders to develop this idea of open civilization? This open civilization idea is an idea where a Muslim is not a leader only for Muslims, nor are they only leader for the humanity, but they're leader for the whole of creation, the seen and unseen. And so therefore, are our institution, are our teachers, are they ready to create that type of people? So from that, I presume schools can work out their priorities, really.
Okay, nicely put. Very smart, the way you handle that one. These are the 3, so I had a take on this, is that we started 2 weeks ago on this, and we were looking at what we teach and how we teach. It's just 2 starting points to simplify this, because it's a huge exercise to be able to go in and do that. And I thought it would be really good just to boil it down to sort of the top 3 things. People ask me, and I start off with, well, we know what we teach, we've got to look at the curriculum. So very quickly, some points there: the creativity, curiosity, emotional intelligence. Somebody talked about neuroscience earlier. There's lots of things in the curriculum that need to be taken out, and lots of things that needed to be added in, depending on where you are and what your students, where they're at. That's the most important thing. So that's the curriculum. It's quite a huge conversation. It's not one thing to go in and fix this. You can't do that. That would be putting plasters over the wound. And then how we teach, what Sister Farah was talking about, you can have the best curriculum in the world, but if you haven't got the people trained to deliver, then a lot of what you're saying is very much about the human development of the people, the vehicles for tarbiyah. And then it really starts with I think it was yourself who was saying about the vision statement of the leadership, or earlier we were hearing Ustad Idris was talking about, is about the leadership, and what you've just alluded to now is about the what and the how. For me, is always driven by the few people at the center. And so this is a starting point where we need to look at. Now, we need more time to be able to go into the burning priorities in curriculum, the burning priorities in leadership, and the burning priorities in training, teacher training. But if you ask me, after 10, 15 years in this sector as an outsider, that's the kind of, that's the 3 starting points. And none of this is absent without action-based stakeholder research. In other words, what we're doing, asking the question to the young people, asking the question to the parents, asking the question to the teachers, to the head teachers, and really going back again and again and again and refining the evaluation. And the question, as Ustad Akram Khan Chima always says, is far more important for us than the answer. If you keep asking the question, it leads us to discover new oceans. And academic research, as Dr. Farah just pointed out about what she's doing with the IELTS approach. So it has to be in that framework of research and academic research. And what you're saying earlier about Brother Faizal, about going back to our tradition, that comes into it for me here, is that we've got to be able to wipe the slate clean, start again, reset, and go back and try to get our understanding of what was the purpose of education, what does education look like, and how we're living in the Western world, and how we're living in contemporary society of what we call schools as the vehicles for this education, and is that sufficient? There's a lot of unlearning to do and a lot of learning to do. So that was my sort of starting point. Again, we can give you individual point in that, but I do want to recommend this book. I don't know if you've come across this, Brother Faizal, but we know Sir Ken Robinson, and people have asked me about what the book is. The book is here. It's You, Your Child, and the School. Now, I've spent 15 days of Ramadan on top of my Quran, but reading this alongside, sorry, it's a bit blurry, so you won't be able to see it. And this book, side by side with these webinars, has really opened my mind a lot more in recent weeks about the vision of education and the challenges that we have. Now, Sir Ken Robinson is well known to the education world. He wrote this book in, I think, 2018. He got it published in 2019, and unfortunately he died in 2020 in August due to cancer. Now, the book, I'm telling you now, covers everything that we have discussed and not been able to discuss in this webinar and in the entire series, from parenting to homeschooling to unschooling to understanding the child, understanding yourself, the tarbiyah of the adults, the process of tarbiyah, the extracurricular activities that we're going to talk about tomorrow in tomorrow's webinar. It really is a fascinating book in terms of all the key issues he covers in how many pages? He does it in just under 300 pages. It's a fascinating book, costs you £7. It's worth the investment. Honestly, I think it's a book that every teacher should have to renew their thinking and reflect on the changes. Now, that's quite good because a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is in there. We've talked about IELC. In terms of improving the curriculum, somebody asked, can you give me a quick tip? There is no quick tip. There's no quick fix to the deep-rooted problems that we have. That's my take on it. But in terms of improving the curriculum, Brother Faizal will know this diagram because I presented it at the NIDA webinars 2 years ago during COVID. Starting point is that for the madrasahs in particular, but also Muslim faith schools, we need to look at Islam not as a religion of aqidah, aqaid, creedal matters, and just, you know, worship, salah, and the 5 pillars. We need to start defining Islam as a way of life, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, confirmed it and completed it and mentioned it in the Quran as deen. Deen is a way of life, not a religion. And deen separates Islam from any other religion because it's a way of life. And by way of life, it's all the stuff on the right side of your screen, on top of all the stuff on the left side of the screen. It's known as 2 concepts of hukuk Allah and hukuk al-ibad. This is not the time to go into because we're running over time, but anyone who's in the maktab sector, anyone in the school sector here, even parents at home now, if you're looking for reforms in your curriculum, I'm just presenting you with a broad look, a broad vision on what the curriculum should at least be doing when it comes to teaching our children Islam. And in Islam, you will find key things outside of the character virtues. You'll understand things around social responsibilities. You'll understand things around ethical dealings, money matters, entrepreneurial stuff, budgeting, all the stuff that actually schools don't teach our children. And so if this tarbiyah, our tarbiyah is centered on something, a model like this as a starting point, that's not to say, this is not talking about skills. Skills are really important. That comes in all of the stuff I'm talking about, skills, values, attitudes, outside of knowledge and understanding. That's the starting point. And, you know, if you want to take a snapshot, do so, because it's quite complicated to be able to comprehend that in a line or two. We have built an entire syllabus on this. So if you're thinking that, okay, this guy's talking philosophical and thin air, there's an entire primary level, secondary level syllabus. Primary is ready, secondary is under revision, that is built to teach this. And you're welcome to attend the hundreds and schools and maktabs and madrasahs who are teaching this to get the feedback from them about how this is important about creating well-rounded individuals. I'm not saying this is the only thing. This is just some of the things that we need to be teaching and reforming in our curriculum. So this is deen, teaching of hukuk Allah and hukuk al-ibad, in particular the often neglected areas of akhlaq, mu'amalat, and mu'asharat. In other words, character development, financial literacy or money matters, and mu'asharat, which is interactions really, or social responsibilities and etiquettes around things. That's what the syllabus looks like. And you can find that on our store. I don't know if it's available or access at the store, but if it's not, just drop us an email, inshallah. We're welcome to share parts of the resources, or see where you're at and how we can work together, inshallah, in terms of the resources. Now, final webinar is tomorrow, where I think this is a good way to end here and continue the chapter tomorrow. Tomorrow, inshallah, 2:30, earlier time than 3 o'clock, we have our final webinar, which concludes the narrative of where we are started from and where we're ending. Is that if you look at today, there's a lot of things which schools mashallah, do, and madrasas do, and they're doing an amazing job. Let's be honest. They're doing an amazing job in the limit of the resources and the limitations of finances and lots of other limitations that they have. They're actually doing an amazing job in the sense that they're doing what they can as best as they can. But we all recognize there's a need for improvement. We all recognize there's the massive need for reformation. How and when will that come? Who will that come by? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And there are lots of change. There is lots of change happening on the ground. I can say this, obviously it's not wholesale. But where schools and madrasas are failing or are unable to give the tarbiyah or we're talking about ta'aleem, tarbiyah and ta'adib to our children, we have to, as educators and parents, look outside. And one of the places to look outside is supplementing that with extracurricular activities and clubs that our children need. And tomorrow's webinar, inshallah, with the Muslim Scouts Foundation and Muslim Sports Foundation, Muslim Scouts Fellowship and Muslim Sports Foundation, 2 MSFs. Tomorrow I will be looking at the key activities and clubs our children need before adulthood. Inshallah, it should be a fascinating talk. Please join. Registration is open. We're almost near full capacity, so please hurry and to avoid disappointment. That will be a conclusion, inshallah ta'ala, of our series where we started about the gaps of what and how, and that should, inshallah ta'ala, allow us to fill that in. Now, in the summary section, we've gone over. I won't take any more time here. In the chat, I would love to hear your main takeaway points from this webinar. If you could drop us a line, inshallah, that'll help us with our evaluation. Some real deep conversations took place today, alhamdulillah. And I would like to hear now what you took away from this, inshallah ta'ala. If you want to get in touch with us, whether it's to do with the resources or the webinar or the recordings or anything else, inshallah ta'ala, if you want to collaborate or you've got a question or even some criticism, please get in touch with us at info@ilmtoamal.org. The social media work that we do, you can see our work on social media on Ilm to Amal or Ilm to Amal Facebook, on Instagram, also on YouTube. We have a WhatsApp number you can join, inshallah, for updates and tarbiyah tips on a weekly, monthly basis. i2astore.com is where you can find our resources. There's lots of free resources there that you can actually download and start using in your classrooms, even at home, inshallah ta'ala. Brother Faizal, I would like to hand over to you to say the final few words, and please, inshallah ta'ala, do let us know about the work of Nida Trust and where people can find you. Please bless us with your final few words, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Brother Waqaus. And I have to say, I know we've been working together for a very long time, and Alhamdulillah, the work that we do and yourselves, it complements.
Of course.
Our work is very much around developing the next generation of leaders and educators. And the work that you're doing in the curriculum and supporting the schools here in the UK as well as abroad is very much appreciated. So keep up the great work, mashallah. And of course, thank you very much to all the participants for joining this session. And also, please let us know. I mean, we'd like to hear your thoughts and views on some of the topics that we've discussed. We didn't have enough time, but it would have been really good to actually discuss some of those ideas a little bit more in detail. But as a kind of final summary from my side, in order for us to really move towards excellence in our educational provision for not only just Muslims, and this is very, very important. Muslims have got a duty to the whole of creation, and so therefore our provision of excellence should be shared across everyone. I mean, this is what I would suggest that we need to really look at. First of all, we need to actually look at, what is it that ultimately that we're trying to create, what kind of civilization that we want to create. So thinking civilizationally rather than just thinking in our own little groups. So it's a civilization type of thinking. What kind of people that we want to create, what kind of leaders we want to create, what is that content, that knowledge that we want to deliver, and also what this continuity, how do we actually embed our tradition into the framework of all the things that we're doing. And on top of that is how do we actually all collaborate together to bring about that dynamic change so that we can actually create that change in the mind shift. So we can change, create that change, and at the same time, bring about that change that we want to see when we are gone. The world is changing very, very quickly, and we need to be able to adapt to those changes very quickly as well. So once again, thank you very much, and please forgive me if I have said anything to offend anyone.
No, thank you, Brother Faizal. As always, mashallah, you've been on point, and thank you so much for taking time out your very busy schedule, because I know you're on your Easter half term and you're on your last few days. So as was Sister Farah. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it in the month of Ramadan. May Allah bless you. May Allah bless all the staff at Nidar Trust and the team for the wonderful work that you're doing. Inshallah ta'ala, I look forward to meeting you very soon, perhaps at another breakfast with the Turkish leaders for some Turkish coffee, inshallah soon, or an iftar. So take care, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Inshallah,
and
okay.
take care. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. And thank you to all of our participants, inshallah ta'ala. I'm sorry if we haven't been able to answer your questions. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll try our best to do so as a follow-up, either by email. I'm still sticking around for a few minutes if anybody wants to question me or anything you want to share, inshallah ta'ala. I'll read the comments now. Thank you so much, inshallah. Take care and all the best for today's fast, inshallah ta'ala. Please remember me, my family, and the Ilm to Amal team in your du'as. There's a lot of work, as you can see, that needs to be done. And inshallah ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tawfiq to do it, and also the strength to do it, and collaboration to do it, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.